A lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." The Gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. So today we hear the story of the Good Samaritan, one of the most well-known and favorite stories that Jesus told. We tend to read ourselves into this familiar story in predictable ways. We determine that we are not supposed to be like the priest or the Levite who passed by the beaten man, but are supposed to be like the Samaritan who shows the man mercy. Good enough. What happens when we turn the story around? What happens if we put ourselves in the beaten man's place? Would we even be asking such a question as who is my neighbor? The lawyer is trying to justify himself by qualifying the term neighbor, to narrow it down, to determine to whom he owes attention, and by implication, whom he can ignore. He's looking for loopholes. But if you are the man in the ditch, do you care about any of that? Do you think that you'd lie there in gentle understanding if someone were to shout over to you to explain that they won't or can't help you because you're not their neighbor? Okay, I'll just lie here and wait until an appropriate neighbor comes along. Or what about this? Are there people about whom you would say, "I'd rather die than let that person help me. I'd rather just lie here and die than experience the compassion of someone I don't know or don't like, or whose theology or politics differs from mine, or who is the wrong color or class or sexual orientation? Yeah, just go on and pass me by and I'll wait for a more appropriate person to show me mercy." The message Jesus is driving home here is this: categories and rules do not matter. They simply do not matter. A person in need is the person who deserves our attention whoever that might be. Categories and rules do not apply either to them or to us. And this is hard. We tend to want people to get what they deserve and deserve what they get. And there are so many people in need all the time, everywhere. So we look for ways to narrow things down, to make life more manageable, to keep from being overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the world's grief and lack and want and need. This is where I have compassion for the lawyer and can imagine myself in his shoes. How on earth can I figure out what to do in the face of unrelenting poverty and brokenness? I am bombarded daily, and I'm sure you are too, with stories and images and the sight of people who are homeless and hungry and beaten and marginalized and hopeless and addicted and dying. I am constantly being asked to help here or there for this cause or that situation. Surely there must be some way that I can determine whom I ought to help. Who deserves my attention among so much need, without simply becoming numb to it all? But again, if I am in the ditch, do I care about any of that? Does any of that matter? Must I position myself as deserving in order to receive mercy? Does God parse us that way? So that only the deserving, the appropriate among us receive grace and mercy and the unfailing and unqualified love of God? Of course not. So you see, this is not a straightforward story with good guys and bad guys and a neat moral at the end. We might try to make it one, and when we do, I think it's because we know how difficult this whole concept is to work with in one's real life. We are intelligent, caring people. And what we see out there in the world is overwhelming need. And we know how powerless we often are to help, to make a difference. And we're so often captive to our own fears, our uneasiness about strangers, our worries about our own safety. We've heard stories about traps and setups and con men. And we've heard propaganda about how people don't deserve to be helped anyway, and they ought to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, etc., etc. But I will say again, God does not parse us that way. God does not divide us into deserving and undeserving. Mercy is mercy. And we do well to remember that whenever we draw a line, we'll find God on the other side of it. God stands with the helpless and the rejected, including those whom we reject. So if you're in the ditch, God is with you. If you are like a Samaritan among Jews, God is with you. If you are in pain, grief, trouble, God is with you. So how does one respond to the great need of the world? The same as eating an elephant, one bite at a time. We learn to see need when we come upon it. It doesn't have to be the entire world's need. It can't be the entire world's need. None of us has the capacity for that. But the need that's right there in front of our nose on our particular journey today is the need to which we are invited to respond. We know we cannot help everybody, but we can show mercy to somebody. We can put our beliefs into action without being overwhelmed ourselves by focusing on the one whose needs we can see now. It takes practice. And we may have to learn from those whom we never expected or do not wish to learn from. Those whose perspective is very different from ours. The perspective of the one to whom harm has been done, even if we didn't cause it or understand it or wish for that harm, even if we'd like to dismiss their feelings because we don't have those feelings and we don't understand them, even if we think it has nothing to do with us. But this is what we vowed at our baptisms. We will seek and serve Christ in all persons and love our neighbors as ourselves with God's help. The Samaritan had eyes to see the suffering of the man in the ditch. He did not avert his gaze, but allowed himself to feel compassion without applying any rules about it. His focus was on performing the action of a neighbor rather than discerning the identity of a neighbor. And with God's help, perhaps we might go out and do likewise.